The sun had already begun its slow crawl behind the jagged ridges when he rode into the town. Dust rose in lazy clouds behind the hooves of his weary horse, each step echoing faintly against the wooden sidewalks. The streets were narrow and brittle, lined with weathered boards and shuttered windows, the kind of town that had known rain maybe twice in the last 2 years. Heat shimmered off the metal of the hitching posts, off the gun barrels slung low in holsters, and off the sweat darkened neck of the man who rode silently. He was tall, lean, a shadow in the heat with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. His eyes were hidden, but the town seemed to know him anyway. At least the few men who lingered outside the saloon did, squinting at the way he dismounted without a word. His name was Silas Kane. Nobody in the town remembered when he'd come to settle near the mesas, not that anyone had cared. What they remembered was the quiet of him, the way he moved like he weighed every step, every glance, and the scars, faint but stubborn, that told stories no one asked about. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with the smell of tobacco, spilled whiskey, and sweat. The piano played a slow, hesitant tune, like the player himself was unsure of his hands. Silas leaned against the doorway for a long moment, letting the chatter drift over him like smoke before he walked to the bar. "Whiskey," he said simply. No greetings, no show of friendliness, just a voice rough and low, carrying the weight of a life that had learned to move without expectation. The bartender, a broad man with a face like aged leather, poured it without asking questions. That was the way things went in Dry Creek. Questions could get a man shot. Or worse. He took a slow swallow, letting the burn work its way down his chest. That's when he noticed her. She was seated near the back, half hidden by the haze of smoke. In a shadowed pillar, her dress was plain, stained at the hem, but her hands, the ones clenched in her lap, were finely kept, delicate. There was a stubborn set to her jaw, a fire in her eyes that didn't belong to someone in her position. Silas could tell she had been watched, owned, perhaps sold, by more than one pair of eyes that saw her as property rather than a woman. He had seen that before, in towns that were less than towns, in men who were worse than animals. The bartender, wiping down a counter scarred with years of knives and spilled drinks, leaned close. "That's Lila. She don't rightly belong here, but the Blackwoods got their eyes on her. Said she's to be auctioned off come the morrow." Silas's jaw tightened. "Auctioned off?" He said it like he didn't want to. "Believe it. Don't look at me like I made it up. It's the truth. Her father's debts, or so they say. Blackwoods always get what they want." Silas nodded slowly, finishing his whiskey. He didn't move toward her yet. It was not his way. He had learned long ago that haste only invited mistakes. The night came slow, the kind that bled into every corner of the wooden town, stretching shadows like black rivers. Silas sat outside the stables, cleaning the rifle he hadn't touched in months, thinking. Dust settled on the leather, the sweat of the day crusted in the creases of his gloves. Somewhere behind the hills, coyotes called, and he thought he heard the faint sound of a horse stumbling, a reminder of how fragile life could be in these parts. Morning arrived with a brittle wind. The town was alive with a grim excitement. A notice had been posted, the auction of Lila Blackwood. She sat on the porch of the sheriff's office, eyes distant, fingers twisting a handkerchief so tightly the cloth had begun to tear. The crowd was loud, the kind of noise that covered up the fear in their hearts with gambling and gossip. Silas watched from a distance, a silent observer weighing the odds. The sheriff, a man fat and ruddy, with hands that liked money more than justice, barked for attention. Men with rifles leaned casually against walls. Others fingered knives. The air smelled of dust, fear, and the faint metallic hint of imminent violence. And then Lila spoke. Not to the crowd, not to the men who eyed her like cattle, but softly to herself, in a voice low and steady. "Save my child," she said. The words were almost drowned by the chatter, but Silas caught them. She had a baby in her arms, swaddled, sleeping. And for a moment, the world shrank to just her and him. Silas didn't think. He moved quietly, like wind over sand. By the time The sheriff realized what was happening. He had stepped into the circle of men surrounding Lila. "She's not for sale," he said. Simple, unyielding. "Who the hell are you?" barked the sheriff, his hand hovering over his revolver. "Someone who knows better than to let a wrong be done," Silas replied. No one moved. The town seemed to hold its breath. It didn't take a gunfight, though Silas knew how to start one. He took Lila's hand gently and nodded at the child. "Come on," he said. And she did, almost instinctively. Like she knew the danger had a name and it was him. They rode hard, the baby nestled between them on his horse. Dust rose behind them, turning the morning sun into a gold haze. Guns were fired, but they were. Far behind, echoing off the canyon walls, like angry spirits disturbed, they rode until the town was nothing but a thin line on the horizon. Silas didn't speak much, and Lila didn't ask. There was a kind of understanding between them, forged. In the silence of fear and relief, the desert stretched ahead, hot and merciless. But it was theirs for the moment. That night, under the sprawl of stars, Silas camped by a dry riverbed. Lila tended the child, humming a tune her mother once sang. The first time in a long while. Silas felt the weight in his chest ease. The fire crackled, throwing shadows that danced across their faces. And he let himself wonder if redemption might be possible, even in a world that had not offered much. The days that followed were slow and careful. Silas guided them across mesas, through arroyos, always keeping the town and the Blackwoods behind. They encountered others along the waymen who eyed them with suspicion, women who whispered blessings, but Silas said little, spoke only when necessary, always keeping the rifle close. Lila began to talk more too, slowly, sharing pieces of her life that had been stolen from her. The child laughed sometimes, a fragile sound that made the desert seem a little less barren. One evening, near a hidden creek that offered shade and water, Lila finally asked the question Silas had been expecting. "Why me?" she said, brushing her fingers through the child's hair. "Why help me?" Silas looked at her for a long moment, the firelight catching the lines in his face. "I've seen what happens when people do nothing," he said quietly. "Sometimes. Someone has to." She nodded, unsure if that was enough, and they sat in silence, letting the wind carry away the tension of the day. But the Blackwoods were not a family to be dismissed lightly. Weeks later, they found the makeshift camp, a ragged trail of dust, and footprints leading away. Gunfire tore through the morning, and Silas and Lila ran, the child held close. It was messy, brutal, the kind of fight that left no man unmarked. Silas was hit, shallow, and cursed under his breath. He returned fire, careful and precise, and in the end, the Blackwoods lay groaning in the dirt, their greed and violence muted. For now, they kept going after that, moving east toward a town where Silas had friends he had not seen in years. People who owed him little and would offer refuge anyway. Lila learned to trust, slowly, letting herself believe that freedom might be more than a fleeting dream. Silas, in turn, began to let go of the weight he had carried, though never fully. There were things that could not be washed away with heroism. Things that clung like old scars when they finally reached the town. It was dusk, the sky a smear of oranges and purples over the rooftops. Silas helped Lila down from the horse. She turned, holding the child, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said softly. No words could carry more than that. He tipped his hat, a gesture more intimate than a handshake, more personal than a promise. "Go on," he said. "Make it count." And she did. Lila found a place for herself in the world, one where she could care for her child without fear, one where the echoes of the Blackwoods were no longer her music. Silas left soon after, walking. Alone into the desert, his silhouette stretched against the setting sun, long and lonely. A man carrying his own burdens. He did not expect thanks, nor did he seek it. For him, the act itself was enough. And in that act, he found a measure of peace he had not known in years. The desert swallowed his figure, dust rising in quiet swirls. Somewhere a coyote cried, and the wind carried the sound of a lullaby, soft and enduring. The world was still. Hard, still cruel, but for one small corner of it, justice had been meted in silence and mercy, and that was enough.